Good evening, Jules. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Listen, we are back again for week two, Grace of Esther, the self healing program, where you will learn different techniques for healing. You will catapult yourself into a new dimension and you'll be ready for community and global influence. So, I want to go ahead and get started without further delays. Once again, we are in week two, and the title of this week's course is The Root of Things. The root of things. All right, so your objectives for this week are that you will know the components of a tree. We're going to be looking at a tree, okay, for this particular lesson. And you will understand how a tree and humans are connected, how they are similar. Jules, you will be reviewing your bloodline using your first activity assignment this week. And you will identify the characteristics and traits that you fit or that you see that you identify with from your bloodline. And Jules, you will receive your next activity assignment. So initially I had one assignment, but I added an additional assignment to this week's module, and you'll understand why as we move along. And also your supplies that you're gonna need for this week's purge. Okay, so you're gonna be getting all of that information this evening. All right, let's get started. The root of things. So we need to really get an idea of where all of these traumas, well, not all of the traumas, but the things that we've experienced in our lives, typically many of them come from the traumas, the patterns, the things that we see that are unfavorable. Many times it is due to the root, okay? And so in order for us to really understand that, I believe that it's important that we look at a tree because we are so similar to a tree. We're so similar to plants in so many ways. But today we're only going to kind of look at the more basic things. We're not going to go deep into all of the similarities, the comparisons. We're not going to do too much of that, but we're just going to stay basic today, okay? But if you like to do further research, then you're certainly open to that. But we're going to be looking at the components of a tree. So if we look at this diagram here, we can see that there's the roots of the tree, there's the trunk of the tree, and then you have the branches, and you have the leaves, and you have the crown of the tree, the head of the tree, okay, which is the leaves, the branches extending out with the leaves that are on the ends of those branches, which we consider to be the crown, okay? Now, when we look at the similarities of man and tree, both are mostly water, okay? Both have a peak lifespan of approximately 80 years. However, after this time span, both trees and man, human, are prone to disease and overall decline in health. Now, this is not something that we would consider to be true for all, because we do know that there are many people who tend to live well past 80 years, but we're referring to just the overall longevity of life. Typically the average is about 80 years, okay? Both are completely unique. So if you look at this particular image on the screen, you will see that there's various different types of trees. They look different. They grow different. Their branches are different. Their branches extend out differently. No two trees are the same, just the same as um, we as humans. Okay. And also, we know that trees and humans, their lineages extends through decades and centuries. Okay. For example, the Christmas tree. We know that the Christmas tree goes back decades and centuries. Palm trees go back decades and centuries. Okay. Same is true for man, that our lineage can be traced back decades and centuries. All right, so let's look at the root of a tree. Okay. So the root of a tree represents the ancestral lineage, okay? So you have all those roots. Look at this image. You have all of those roots that are extending under the ground, and it's where the tree actually forms, okay? If we look at man, if we look at human, the root of the tree represents the ancestral lineage. Now, researchers have found just under 20,000 genes in our human bodies and about 3 billion DNA base pairs. Okay. So naturally, we share DNA with our ancestors and we pick up behaviors from the families who raised us. Okay. So there's different ways that we can pick up things. We can pick up things in the blood and the DNA components, and we pick up things in the behaviors and the patterns from people who were in our environment as we grew up. Okay. So this is another reason why I asked you to create a chart if any of you were ever adopted or raised by your unbiological parents, um, to still create a chart, because we can still pick up behaviors from family members who raised us, whether they were by our biological or share our DNA or blood or not. Okay. All right, so you can inherit habits, patterns, and we'll discuss that later, pains, and features from your ancestors. You can inherit these things, okay? All right, let's look at the branches of a tree. So as we move from the root to the tips, we're moving forward in time. So look at this image. Now we see that the roots are covered. We can't see the roots. We just looked at that in a previous slide. But now here we see the branches, the trunk of the tree, and the branches extending out. So this is how we can use the similarity in us as humans, that these trunks, as they extend out and as the branches begin to extend out, this is time. This is time moving forward from ancestral, from the roots, all the way up to generation to generation to generation, century after century, well, decade after decade, century after century. Okay, this is how we grow and this is how we evolve. Now, take note how these trees, although they have different branches, they're still connected to that root. They're still connected to that trunk. They're still connected to the base of that tree. So even though they branch off, they still share the same root. All right. So now there's this thing that we call ancestral trauma healing. Okay. So with ancestral trauma healing, What we're simply doing is we're not speaking to our ancestors, we're not worshiping ancestors. All we're doing is simply finding errors or finding deficiencies in our blood trait, in our DNA, in our lineage, that are that these deficiencies that need to be corrected, that are connected to us, and we heal them through various different techniques. And we're going to be looking at those techniques as we move forward in this course. So, when ancestors pass away, when people in our bloodline pass away, it doesn't mean an end. The reason for that is because our DNA print continues on through our family lineage. We saw that on the previous slide with the branches, with the trunk of the tree extending from the root, and as time progresses, these branches begin to extend out. The trunk begins to grow and extend out from generation to generation, from decade to centuries. Okay. So the ancestral trauma or in any unhealthy habits bleed through the lineage. So think about that root of the tree. If anything down in the root of that tree, if there's any traumas that took place, even it doesn't even necessarily have to take place at the root of the tree. It could take place at the in the trunk, somewhere in the trunk. But as time progresses and as that tree continues to grow, whatever deficiency occurred in any area of that tree is going to bleed through the lineage. So, before we deal with individual traumas, before we deal with traumas that we've experienced, it is very important that we deal with ancestral traumas. Okay. And ancestral traumas, we can look at slavery as a form of ancestral traumas. We can look at um, uh, poverty as a form of ancestral trauma, uh, domestic violence, a form of ancestral trauma. You know, if it took place anywhere in our lineage, especially more than once, it is something that is going to likely show up in again somewhere in that lineage. Okay. So, but many times there are different traumas that we experience that are not showing up in the ancestral lineage. And we will deal with those traumas later. But now we are really going to be looking at the ancestral traumas that we need to address. All right. So ancestral healing reveals and heals hidden inherited ancestral trauma, behaviors, and wounds. Okay. So when we begin to look at things that took place in the ancestral line, in we would have to deal with those things, certain behaviors, um, and we're gonna really get deep with the behaviors. Um, you know, uh, there are certain families who have certain things that took place in their lineage, such as incest or family violence or rape, um, various different traumas, childhood abuse, neglect, abandonment. All of these things are traumas and behaviors and wounds that begin to trickle over into the branches and and uh, and the leaves from the trunk, even from the root. So it helps us too, ancestral healing also helps us to resolve pain and behavioral patterns. You know, if you wondered why you do things that are unfavorable and um, you just can't stop doing them. such as maybe um, rocking back and forth in a chair, patting your knees, these things. And you're like, I don't understand why I do this. Like, I just have to rock back and forth. And it's unfavorable. You don't like it because you find yourself in public sitting at work and you're rocking back and forth and you can't seem to break yourself from doing that. Those are possible ancestral patterns, behavioral patterns. Okay. And we're going to really get deep and really look at some behavioral patterns that are that may show up or that you may be experiencing. Now, as we move forward in this particular course, The Grace of Esther, there will be a new platform that will need to be developed in order for us to really deal with many of these issues, because it may be difficult for it may be difficult for you to deal with these things independently. So we will extend the flat platform to a webinar um, type setting in order to deal with these issues. However, we will need to see how many participants will really need to access that. So please reach out to me if you are participating in this course, because you will definitely, especially if you're taking part in these activities, excuse me, you will definitely need to be in a group like setting. And we won't have, to have camera access for everyone. It'll be a webinar base in order to deal with these issues. All right, so ancestral healing, it also helps stop these patterns and other issues from passing to future generations. So if you can catch it, right, and heal it, pull that root like a root canal, pull that root out, then you will have saved a future generation from unfavorable behavioral patterns, from traumas and wounds to reoccur. All right, so ancestral trauma healing should not be a way to blame or disempower parents or other family members. It's something that they cannot control. So don't get mad at your mom if you see that something it showed up when you began to do your research and you begin to feel like it's your mom's fault. It's something that they cannot control. It comes from the root of the tree. It comes from the trunk of the tree. Okay, these are things that are often uncontrollable. Okay, this ancestral trauma healing is simply a process for starting the healing process. Okay, it's a process for starting the healing process. So, because we go through the ancestral trauma healing process, does not mean that it's gonna cure all things that are unfavorable in your life when it comes to traumas and behavioral patterns. It is simply the starting the process. And this is why we call it the root of things, because we have to really deal with what's in our DNA, what's in our blood, what have we been around, what have we been exposed to that we need to deal with before we begin to deal with self. Okay, Jules. So the first step in ancestral trauma healing is sequencing and acknowledgement. Okay, sequencing and acknowledgement. All right. So we need to have ancestral knowledge. Okay, in order for us to acknowledge that there is some traumas, some pains, some things that that trickle in our blood through the DNA, through the lineage, is we have to acknowledge it. We have to understand and get knowledge of what is going on or what took place in our lineage. We have to talk to family members. We have to dig for historical records. We have to do DNA testing. It's important that we look at diseases, and this is where sequencing take place, where we look at the DNA. We look at different diseases that have been showing up in our lineage. Okay, and even if you think you know, if you feel like, okay, well, I know that there's diabetes in my family, I know there's heart disease in my family, you still need to get a DNA test to kind of see what things are actually there besides what you already know. And also to get confirmation, it's important. And research historical events. So if you know that you were a direct, especially a recent family member experienced, maybe even, let's just go with Hurricane Katrina. That was a horrifying event, right? And so you can begin to look at that and find out, what did the family members go through? What did they experience? Where were they at the time of the flooding, and what traumas did they go through, if any? You have to look at historical events. You can even you go back to slavery, um, the civil rights era, various different things. We have to look at these things. It may sound minute, it may sound strange, but it is important because it allows us to really analyze the things that we are dealing with, or that we have dealt with, or our ancestors have dealt with, because it's likely that it's going to show up again. All right. And then we have to acknowledge all the traumas that we found. We cannot be in denial saying, oh, well, my great 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 grandmother uh, was raped by her slave owner, and she ended up having 3 children by the slave owner, and they they unalived one of the children. You have to acknowledge that you are a product of that. Okay, you have to acknowledge all of the traumas that you found. You can't say, oh, that was during slavery days. I wasn't around. My mother wasn't even around. No, you have to acknowledge. That's the first step. Sequencing, understanding what's in your blood, and acknowledging what you found through historical data. All right, step 2. Then we have to build a narrative. We call it narrative building. We have to observe if there's any patterns or behavior or emotions that reoccur. So, did these patterns reoccur in the next generation? Does these patterns reoccur even with you? You have to be able to look at all of the things that you found, the information that you gathered from interviewing family members, from doing your research, to see if there's anything that happened again more than once. Suicide, um, domestic abuse, incest, um, rape, child neglect, um, dropping out of school, being uneducated. Um, all we're looking for traumas, okay? And even in this, you can even uncover positive aspects of yourself and your ancestors too. So we're not just really looking at the negative things, which we really are because we have to deal with them. But through this particular research, you will find some positive things that you need to connect with, that are sitting in your blood, that are connected to your lineage. Okay. All right. So step two, the narrative building, it consists of various techniques that is designed for healing yourself, for letting go, and most of all, forgiveness. Okay. We have a whole um class session that is going to deal with forgiveness. Forgiveness. Okay. All right. So, reunification. Many family members can be reunited through narrative building. You may find that there was some adoptions that took place, that some children were given away. And you may connect with family members, unknown family members. So, there's many positive things that come out of ancestral trauma healing. The narrative building is also understanding our ancestral lineage and engaging in an ancestral healing. It's beneficial to ourselves and our relatives. All right. You're honoring ancestral trauma and releasing it. Other family members will begin to notice that you changed in how you carry yourself and how you deal with issues, and that there's no, that things have changed in your life. You seem to be less burdened. Okay. So we're going to begin to unpack these things and deal with each and every one individually. All right, Jules. So we've reached the end of this lesson. What you are going to do with for this next activity assignment is you are going to circle on that chart that you created last week all the traits and characteristics that you identify with or show up in your chart, such as trauma, diseases, anything negative, okay, that showed up that you identify with, or it showed up once. You know that your great grandmother was divorced, and your mother was divorced. You're gonna circle those things. You know that your great auntie was um was a victim of domestic violence, and your cousin is now a victim of domestic violence. The things that you know of, the traumas, the diseases. Someone in your family passed away from heart disease, and then you found out that your great somebody died of heart disease. Okay, you have to circle these traits and these characteristics. Anything, I don't care what it is, that shows up more than once, I need you to circle it. Okay. Is there anyone who people say you favor? Okay, so the next thing is, I need you to document. Do you look like anyone? Have you seen any pictures and you favor that person in your family, on your mother's side or your father's side? I need you to identify that. You need to do these trait characteristic identifications for both your mother's side and your father's side. So you're going to have to sit down and truly do the work. Okay. This is not an activity that is going to take you 10 or 15 minutes, because at the end of the day, you could be at work and you have an aha moment. You need to be able to make sure that you take notes so that you can add that to your chart at a later time. Don't just let it slip your memory. You need to deal with it right away. As soon as you hear something in your mind, or you think about something, you see something, you need to stop what you're doing and take notes. Okay. And if you don't have your chart handy, you will need to, like, maybe put it in your in your phone, or write yourself a quick note. But you need to be able to transfer this stuff to your chart at a later time. And be prepared to begin the healing work on next week. All right, so you need to research your first, and here's your next activity. Activity 1.3. So I'm giving you 2 assignments this week. I need you to research your first and last name. Research your first and last name. What do they mean? Okay. What does your first name mean? And what does your last name mean? I need you to do the research. And you're going to analyze whether or not you identify with the information that you found. Okay. So for instance, for me, I looked up my name, my first and last name, and this link doesn't work. I had a link on here. My first name is Montoya, and I found that it means shepherd. Wish I could show you guys this. I guess I'll try it next week. It says historical records and history tell a story, and much knowledge and truth can be obtained from learning about the past. Let me see if I can find this about my name. It says Montoya as a shepherdic surname. It's a shepherdic surname, excuse me. Shepherds. So it means leader, a shepherd. And it's actually a surname. It's a last name. So after I found that, I went and did some research, and I also found that it says many of the gypsies carry many of our names. That is the reason many were killed. It did not matter if they were Catholic. It did not matter if they had a Castilian lineage. It did not matter if they were white and blonde with blue eyes. What mattered was the name and the names that they carried. Very early in history, a community of Jews lived in Spain. Many changed their names from Hebrew into Spanish. During the Babylonian exile, the same was true. This is true here in America. Many Morinos changed their name to Brown. You will find that there are many Jews who go by the name of Brown. Sephardic means an area of where the family came from. Ashkenazi also means the same. If your family is of the early settlers of the Americas, you will have family origins coming from both Sephardic and Ashkenazi. You will find Mirandas listed as Sephardic and also another group listed as Ashkenazi. Anyone that had or believed in a Jewish way was considered of an impure lineage. Puerto Rico, dirty was the identification of anyone trying to observe Torah, the law of Moses. Gente Purica, people of an impure lineage. The people tried to keep a pure Judaic lineage. Many married into other tribes or Gentile, but many kept the lineage of their tribe. For the ones who do not have a pure Jew lineage of the one of tribes of Israel, they will still have Jewish blood. Montoya is a Jewish name. It one time was spelled this way: Montoyah. This means Monte de Dios, Mount of our God. As time went on, they tried to remove anything that sounded Jewish from the names to protect the children, so that the children will not be tortured and burnt while the parents watched. The name Leva, the different spelling of this name are many. Lay means of the law. The origin of the name means coming from the Levites, from the Levitical priesthood. Many of the descendants still carry a memory or artifact of their ancestors that settled the Americas. So there you have it about my name. Yay! I love this. When I read this about my name, I was like, oh my God, it fits so much. And I believe that it was spiritually, I believe it was a way that God began to deal with me about who I am. And so that was part of my healing process. Me connecting with my name. Yah, Montoya, YAH at the end. And this is one God. And I don't want to get too spiritual, but God will change our names. And he changed my name. He showed me that my name is Toya. Toya. Okay. And that I belong to the Levitical priesthood because I am prophetic. I am a prophet. Okay. So, and they mostly belong to the Levitical priesthood. But anyhow, that's on a whole nother notice. But anyhow, so we're going to move forward. I'm going to close out this session. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, if you have any concerns. Um, Once again, my email address is windofhopehouston@gmail.com. Okay. And please put Grace of Esther in the subject headline with any questions or concerns, please. Again, windofhopehouston@gmail.com. And you need to put Grace of Esther in the subject headline. And I pray that this was edifying to you, that you were able to understand that you are a tree, just like a tree, and that everything connected to you has a root and it started somewhere. All those traumas, all those pains, all those hurts. Well, many of those pains, many of those traumas, many of those hurts are beyond your control. You had nothing to do with that. You inherited it. And so, but the good thing about it is that we can pull that root, we can do a root canal, and we can pull that root right on out of there, that unfavorable thing, and remove it from our lineage so that we won't have to deal with it anymore. In the future, the people that come after us, our children, our grandchildren, our great great grandchildren, they won't have to deal with that trauma because you were the person who stood up to that ancestral issue and eliminated it. So, through healing, through ancestral healing. So, ancestral healing is our first step, and then we'll move on to self healing. All right, so have a good evening. God bless you, Jules.